There is a place on the North Cliff where the wind comes off the sea like it holds a grudge, and that is where I found the most powerful man in the realm on his knees in the dark, and understood, finally, that I had been wrong about every single thing. The rain had turned to ice. He was not weeping the way men weep. He was coming apart very quietly, the way stone does, from the inside, along a seam you cannot see until it gives. I had said no to this man 3 times. I had been so proud of my no, I had carried it around like a lantern. I knelt in the freezing mud beside a grave I did not yet have a name for, and I put my hand over his where it gripped the cold marker, until his knuckles split, and for the first time I did not say no. I have wondered since whether that was also the moment I finally lost. The first time I said no, he laughed. It was a market morning 3 weeks before any of that, and I did not yet know there was a grave, or a sister, or a wolf that knew my garden better than I did. I keep bees on a hill my grandmother held by old Grant, above a village that needs me for candles and salves, and the dark amber honey the children claim cures everything, which it does not, but I let them believe it. The hill is mine. That is the most important thing to understand about me, and the thing that, it turned out, no one in the King's Keep could fit inside their heads. I owe no one. I answer to weather and bees and the turning year, and I had arranged my whole life around the luxury of never having to want anything a powerful man could give me. So when the Alpha King came down the market row in grey and iron, with his court trailing behind him like a held breath, and stopped at my table and looked at my honey instead of my face, I was the only person in the square not afraid. I had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. Alaric of the Iron Territories, who had not lost a war or an argument in living memory, whose composure was so complete it functioned as a kind of weather. The square went silent around him the way a forest goes silent around something with teeth. "This is the hill, honey," he said. "Not to me, to the air near me. It is. I did not add your grace." I noticed his second-in-command noticed that I did not. "I want the hill," the king said. "The keep will buy it. You will keep your bees and a wage and a roof, and you will not have to stand in markets. Name a price to my steward." It was, I understood, meant to be a kindness. It was the kind of kindness that ends with you owning nothing and being grateful. "No," I said. I have replayed the next second many times. The whole court froze, not at the refusal, I think, but at the simplicity of it, the way you would freeze if a cat told you no in plain words. And the King of the Iron Territories looked at me directly for the first time, and something crossed his face that he did not authorize, a flicker, gone before it finished, and then he laughed. One short, surprised breath of it, like a man who has stubbed his toe on furniture he owns. "No," he repeated, as though tasting a foreign coin. "It's my grandmother's hill," I said. "I'm not for sale, and neither is she." He left without buying the honey. His second-in-command, Alaric, I would learn, a broad grave man who wore worry like a second cloak, lingered half a heartbeat, and leaned in, and said under his breath, with something close to fear, "No one tells him no." "Someone just did," I said, and went back to my bees. What I did not tell Alaric, what I did not tell anyone, was that I already had a wolf. He had been coming to my hill for a year, a great silver beast, grey along the spine, who had simply appeared one evening at the edge of the bee garden and lain down among the hives as though he had an appointment. The bees did not sting him. I have kept bees my whole life, and I have never seen them tolerate anything the way they tolerated him. They crawled over his paws like he was part of the hill. He let me pull burrs from his coat. He stole my sun hat twice and buried it badly. He brought me things, a hair, a smooth stone, once a sprig of sea holly from the cliffs I never walked, laid at my door, with the care of a creature who had carried it a long way in soft jaws. I called him the gentleman, because he was better mannered than most men I had served candles to, and because naming a thing properly means admitting you intend to keep it, and I was not ready to admit that about a wild wolf. I did not connect him to anything. Why would I? The wolf was mine, and the king was the king, and the two facts lived in separate rooms in my head, and that, I see now, was exactly the architecture the truth was hiding inside. The second offer came 8 days later, and by then I had been summoned to the keep. Not arrested, summoned, which at the keep is the same shape with better manners. The Hill's grant, it transpired, was irregular, a century-old scrap of paper that the council had decided to regularise, and the only person who could regularise it was the king. And the king wished to discuss it over a meal I had not asked for, in a hall I did not want to be in. The hall was the most beautiful thing I had ever resented. And there was a woman at the king's right hand, Lady Cassia, gold and cold and entirely composed, who had clearly arranged her whole life around a seat that I, a beekeeper with honey under her nails, was somehow disordering by merely existing in the room. The grant can be confirmed in perpetuity, the king said, when the plates were cleared. Made unbreakable, yours and your daughter's after you, beyond the reach of any council. A pause, weighed and set down like a stone on a scale. If you take a position here, keeper of the keep's stores, a name, a standing, security no market day can take from you. It was a better offer. It was in fact a genuinely good offer, and I understood the cost of it the way I understand weather coming. And if I say no? Then the grant goes back to the council, said Lady Cassia, gently, before he could answer, and councils do as councils do. I looked at the king. He had not said it. I noticed that he had let her say it, and that he did not like that she had. No, I told him. I'll take my chances with the council. I'd rather lose the hill standing on it than keep it on a leash. The hall made a sound. Alaric, behind the throne, closed his eyes briefly, like a man watching a bridge wash out. And the king did not laugh this time. He went quiet, a specific total quiet, the quiet of a vast thing holding still, and he looked at me the way you look at a map that does not match the country you are standing in, and he said, "You truly do not want anything I have." "I want my hill," I said. "You keep trying to give me my hill with strings on it, and calling it a gift." Something moved behind his eyes, and did not finish moving. He let me go home. That night the gentleman was waiting in my bee garden, and he put his great head on my knee and sighed as though he had had the longer day, and I told him, the way I told him everything, that the king of the Iron Territories was the loneliest powerful man I had ever met, and did not have the first idea of it. The wolf looked at me for a long moment. Then he got up and walked to the cliff path and looked back, once, the way a creature does when it wants you to follow. I did not. I have thought about that a great deal since, about the night my own wolf tried to show me the grave, and I went inside instead and banked the fire. If you are wondering why a woman, with everything she needed, kept being dragged toward a man who frightened a whole court, and what was waiting at the top of that cliff path that I was not ready to see, stay with me. The third offer is coming. And the third offer is where I stopped being the one who understood the situation. Follow along, so you do not lose the thread. The third offer was not made in a hall. Lady Cassia saw to that, though she did not mean to. She made her move first. The council voted. On a morning I was not invited to revoke the grant entirely, and men came up my hill with a sealed order and instructions to count my hives as crown property. I stood in my own garden and watched a clerk put a tally mark against my grandmother's bees. And for the first time in my self-sufficient life, I felt the specific cold of having no one to call. So I walked to the keep on my own feet, with no summons, and I was not let in, and I stood at the gate like a petitioner until the king came out. He came out himself. That, I would later learn, had never happened. He came through his own gate into the mud with his court scrambling behind him, and he looked at me standing there with the revocation order crushed in my fist, and the composure that functioned as weather cracked clean across. "Who signed this?" he said. It was not a question to me. "Your counsel. While you were not looking." I held it up. "You said the grant was beyond their reach. You were wrong, or you lied, and I don't know which is worse." Maren. It was the first time he had used my name. He said it like it cost him something he could not spare. "Come inside. Out of the cold. Let me. Don't fix it with another offer. It is not an offer." And there, at his own gate, in front of his own court, and Lady Cassia's white face, and Osric's open horror, the proudest man in the realm did the thing his pride had been built specifically to make impossible. Stay, not as keeper of stores. Not on the council's terms, or mine. Stay at my side, as my equal, as the only person in this realm who has never once needed me, because I find I cannot stop thinking about the one woman who doesn't, and I am too tired to pretend that is about a hill. It was a proposal. The whole court understood it was a proposal, the Luna's seat, the thing Lady Cassia had ordered her life around, offered in a courtyard to a beekeeper with a revocation order in her fist. And I said no. A third time, calm, certain, the no I had carried like a lantern. "No," I said. "You can't ask me to stand beside you in the same breath your counsel steals my ground out from under me. You don't want a partner, your grace. You want the one thing in your kingdom that isn't yours. That's not love. That's appetite. And I've been hungry before. And I know the difference. I have never seen a silence land that hard on that many people." And the thing that crossed the king's face this time did not flicker and vanish like the first day, did not freeze into stillness like the second. It changed all the way through, slow and terrible and complete, like the tide turning in a single body. And what was left looking out at me was not a king at all, and not appetite, and not anything I had a name for. It was something that had been waiting a very long time to be seen, and had just been refused by the one person who almost had. He did not argue. That was what undid me later. He simply said, very low, "You're right that I don't ask. I never learnt how." And he turned and walked back through his gate, and Osric followed him with a backward look at me. That was not horror anymore, but something closer to grief. And Lady Cassia smiled. I should have gone home triumphant. I had said no to a king 3 times, and kept my spine. Instead, I stood in the mud with my chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, and I understood that I had just won an argument I did not actually want to win, and I did not know why. I found out 3 days later, and it ended the version of me that thought she had the situation in hand. I had a standing order, you see. For 2 years, a single jar of my plainest honey, not the dark amber the children loved, the pale early honey nobody asked for, had been bought every month by someone I never saw. Old coin, the heavy kind not minted in 30 years, left at the crossroads shrine below my hill, with a folded note that only ever said the same as always. I filled it without thinking. A customer is a customer. I had built a small private theory that it was some sentimental old widow, and left it there. That week, with my grant revoked and my heart inexplicably bruised, I decided to find out who it was, because I needed, badly, to feel like I understood one single thing. So I left the jar and I waited in the gorse above the shrine in the cold until the moon came up. The gentleman came for it. My wolf, the silver wolf who slept in my bee garden. He came down the crossroads in the moonlight, and took the jar of pale honey up in his soft, careful jaws, the way he carried everything precious. And he turned and went up the north cliff path, the path he had tried to show me, and I followed him this time, all the way to the top, where the wind comes off the sea like a grudge. There was a grave there, old, well-tended, a low stone worn smooth, and the wolf set the jar down against it with a tenderness that stopped my breath, and lay down beside it in the wind, and changed. I had never seen a shift. I will not pretend it was beautiful. It was the most painful-looking thing I have ever witnessed, and the most private, and I should have looked away. I did not. The silver went out of the great body, and the man came up out of it, on his knees in the dark beside the grave, and it was the king. It was Alaric, and he gathered the small pale jar of my nobody honey to his chest, like it was the last warm thing in the world, and I heard him say a name to the stone. Hala, his sister, the stone said. Beloved. Dead, 9 years. I stood in the gorse with my hand over my mouth and felt every certainty I owned go out from under me at once. The wolf in my garden, the honey to a grave, the man who could not stop coming to my hill and did not know how to say why. He had not been collecting me. He had been coming to the one place on his earth where the grief let go of his throat. My hill, my bees, my grandmother's pale early honey that a little girl named Hala had loved before I was old enough to know either of them, and he had been doing it on 4 legs, because the man was not allowed to grieve, and the wolf did not care what the man was allowed. I had called it appetite. To his face. I had been so proud of my lantern. The next morning there was a different woman walking up the keep road, and she was done being amused. I did not feel wonder, I felt furious, at him, for hiding 9 years of grief inside a wolf and letting me mistake it for a king's vanity, at myself, for being so in love with my own independence that I had refused the only honest thing anyone had ever offered me. The softness I had carried up that hill curdled into something with an edge, and it has not gone back. I had spent my life making sure I never needed anyone. It had made me very good at not being needed, and I was starting to suspect those were the same skill. I did not go to forgive him. I went to fight, because something was about to be taken that he was too proud to defend out loud, and I had just realized I was the only one who could see it. Lady Cassia, you understand, had not been idle, with the king visibly unsteady, bewitched by a honey girl. The council whispered. She made her real move. She did not aim at me. She aimed at the grave. There was to be a choosing, a formal court rite. The king to confirm a lunar at last, and put the unseemly rumours to rest, and Cassia had the council behind her, and the date set before he could refuse it. And as the centrepiece of her case that Alaric was unfit to choose for himself, she meant to produce, before the whole court, the thing she had paid a clerk to dig up, that the king of the Iron Territories spent his nights as a wolf, carrying honey to his dead sister's grave like a madman, unmanned by a grief 9 years stale. She would break him open in public to prove he needed managing, and put her own hand on the crown while he was still bleeding. I learnt this from Osric, who came to my hill himself, this broad grave second in command, who had once warned me no one tells the king no. He stood in my bee garden where his king had slept 100 nights as a wolf, and he said he will let her do it. Do you understand? He will stand there and let her use Hala to gut him in front of his own court, because he believes he deserves it. He has believed for 9 years that he should have died on the cliff instead of her. He looked at me with no horror left at all. You are the only person who has ever told him no, and meant it for his sake. I am asking you to tell him one more thing. So I went to the choosing. The hall was full of every soul who had watched me refuse him 3 times, and Cassia stood gold and certain at the king's right hand, with a sealed parchment in her grip. And Alaric sat the wolf throne with his composure back on like armour over a wound, ready to let her open him. The cold woman rose. She began to speak about fitness, about a king unmanned, about evidence the court must hear, and she lifted the parchment, and I watched Alaric not move, not defend himself, braced to take it. I did not let her finish. "I'll tell them," I said, and walked into the middle of the king's hall, uninvited, the way I had walked into everything in my life, and the whole court turned. "You want to read out where the king goes at night? I'll save you the parchment. He goes to his sister's grave. He brings her honey. My honey, the pale early kind a little girl liked before either of you were anything but children." I turned to the court, to the 100 faces that had thought me a beekeeper, with ideas above her station. "You were told that's the behaviour of a man who needs managing. I keep bees. I'll tell you what it's actually the behaviour of. It's the behaviour of the only honest creature in this room." The hall had gone utterly silent. "He has run your wars and held your borders, and never once let you see him grieve. Because you." I looked at Cassia, and I did not raise my voice, and I have been told since that it carried to the back wall like a struck bell would do exactly what you are doing right now. Use it. You didn't find a weakness, my lady. You found the one strong thing left in him, and you mistook it for a crack because you have never loved anything you couldn't spend. Cassia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. There is a particular silence that follows the truth said plainly by someone with nothing to lose, and the whole court was drowning in it, and she could not find the surface. And the king stood up off his throne. He came down the dais steps, past Cassia and her useless parchment, and he stopped in front of me, and the armour was simply gone. He did not put it back on, not in front of any of them. "You said it was appetite," he said, low, "only for me," though the silent hall heard every word. "You were the only person in 9 years to tell me no, and I let you, because you were the only person who ever saw me clearly enough that your no meant something. I should have shown you the grave the first night the wolf tried to. I was ashamed, not of her, of needing." His jaw worked. "You were right that I never learnt to ask. I'm asking now, in front of all of them, for nothing you have to give me. Only that you stop being somewhere I am not." That, it turns out, was the offer I had been waiting my whole proud life to refuse, and could not. The grant. I should tell you about the grant, because he did the thing that cost him. Before the court, before he had any yes from me at all, he tore Cassia's revocation in half and confirmed the hill to me and my daughters in perpetuity, free and unleashed, no string, no seat, no condition, and named it Crown-Protected Ground, which meant he had just given away the one piece of leverage that might have bought him my yes, in front of every advisor who had told him to keep it. He gave me the thing that made me free of him. Then he stood there, free of leverage, and waited. So I gave him my yes the only way it could be honest, owing him nothing, holding all my own ground, choosing him because I wanted to, and not because I had to, which is, I have come to think, the only kind of yes worth a damn. The storm came that night, the way grief does, when you finally stop arming against it. He went up the cliff in it, and I went after him, and that is the part you saw at the start. The most powerful man in the realm on his knees in the freezing dark, coming apart along the seam at last, and me kneeling in the mud with my hand over his, where he gripped the cold marker, until his knuckles split. The old grief did not go quietly. It came up harder than it had in 9 years, cold driving into my own bones, the wind trying to take us both off the cliff, blood on the stone from his hand and then from mine where I held it there. He tried to tell me to go where it was warm. I told him no, one last time, and that one I meant the other way around. And I stayed. And I was the steady thing while he broke. And the breaking did not kill him, because for the first time someone he could not buy and did not own had simply decided not to leave. When the kiss came, at the top of that cliff with the sea below and his sister's stone beside us, it was not a thing I will describe in any way I would have to be careful about. It was the moment the want stopped being hunger and turned into the thing hunger had only ever been pointing at. It was 9 years of held breath let go at once. Then the storm was just weather. And we were two cold people who had decided to be cold together, and we went down the hill. Lady Cassia did not stay for the wedding. The court that had watched her try to butcher a king with his own grief had a long memory, and no further use for her. She went north to relatives who wanted her even less, stripped of her seat and her standing, and the council that had voted my hill away found itself suddenly eager to agree with whatever the king said next. Osric stood up at the choosing that became a claiming and was the first to bend the knee, and later, in his cups, told me he had known the morning I refused the first offer that I would be the ruin of all his careful plans, and that it was the best thing that had happened to the Iron Territories in 9 years. I have never let him forget he once told me, "No one tells the king no." It is a year on as I tell you this, and the hill is still mine. Mine, the word the whole keep finally learned to say correctly. We split our nights between his stone halls and my grandmother's cottage, and the bees have decided the Alpha King is acceptable, which is more than they grant most people. The dark amber honey still goes to the village children, who think it cures everything. And on the first cold morning of every month, a jar of the pale early honey still goes up the north cliff to a low-worn stone, except now 2 people carry it, on 2 legs, in daylight, and we sit a while with Halla and the wind, and it is not a wound he visits in secret anymore. It is just his sister. He talks to her. He told her about me. I am told she would have laughed at the part where I said no 3 times, and I like to think she would have been on my side. I spent my whole life making certain I needed no one, and I was so good at it, I nearly walked past the one person who only ever wanted to be let in. I named a king's wolf the gentleman because I was not ready to admit I meant to keep him. Reader, I kept him. So here is what I genuinely cannot decide, a year warm and still turning it over, when I refused him that 3rd time in the mud at his own gate. Was I protecting myself, the way I told myself I was? Or was I punishing him for needing me when I had spent my whole life making sure no one would? Tell me below. I have argued both sides, and lost both times. And if you want to know what happened the first winter a beekeeper sat at the head of the Iron Court, and what his wolf did the day the council came back to apologise, comment the gentleman, and stay with me. There's more of this one. Where are you listening from tonight?